There are stories so grotesque, so unfathomably wicked, they haunt the human conscience long after the headlines fade. In the quiet town of Willow Creek, nestled between sleepy woods and farmlands, evil did not come in the form of a shadowy stranger or a crazed drifter. No, this time, evil wore a smile, a mother's smile. This is the story of Margot Whitaker, a wife, a homemaker, a loving mother of three, or so everyone thought. By the end of this 5-part descent into madness, you'll question everything you thought you knew about family, motherhood, and evil. Margot Whitaker was the kind of woman people praised from a distance and whispered about up close. She was striking, tall, with ice blonde hair always in a perfect twist and eyes as pale as storm clouds. A former pastry chef turned stay-at-home mother, Margot lived with her husband, Philip, a respected mechanic, and their 3 children, Elise, Jonah, and the baby, Lily, in a charming colonial home at the edge of town. To outsiders, the Whitakers were idyllic. PTA meetings, Sunday church, fresh pies on the windowsill. But those closest to the family noticed something off about Margot, an emotional coldness, a rigidity in her discipline, and a near-obsessive need for control. Neighbors whispered about how her children rarely laughed, how they walked in single file like soldiers, how Margot spoke to them in soft, clipped commands, never raising her voice, but never showing warmth either. And Philip? He was rarely home before dusk, always at the shop, always exhausted. They lived in a picture frame, but no one dared look behind the glass. It was October 17th, the night the storm hit. Willow Creek was pummeled by record winds and torrential rain. Power lines went down. Most stayed in with candles, books, or board games. For the Whitakers, it was supposed to be roast night. Margot had a tradition. Every Sunday, she prepared a special dinner: meat, roasted vegetables, and fresh bread. A family ritual she insisted upon, no matter what. That night, the power had gone out, yet the house was filled with a peculiar aroma, a thick, iron-heavy scent that mingled with rosemary and garlic. Philip, exhausted from a 12-hour shift, stepped inside to find candles lit, plates set, and Margot smiling sweetly. "Dinner's ready," she said. They ate in silence, just the two of them. The children, she claimed, had been naughty and were sleeping early. Philip didn't ask questions. He rarely did. Margot handled the children. Margot handled everything. But later that night, as Philip dumped the leftovers into the trash, he noticed something odd: a small, charred bracelet, one he remembered giving Elise for her birthday. It had been caught in the grease at the bottom of the pan. He paused, stared at it. Then he threw it away. The very next day, the Whitaker children were reported missing by their elementary school. No one had seen Elise, Jonah, or Lily since Friday. Margot told the school she had decided to homeschool them, something she had mentioned casually for months. A spur-of-the-moment decision, she explained. The principal asked for paperwork, but Margot was evasive. A welfare officer stopped by that afternoon. Margot answered the door in an apron dusted with flour, her hair perfectly coiled. The house smelled of freshly baked bread. She smiled. "They're napping." He asked to see the children. "They're not feeling well. Could you return tomorrow?" Something about her tone, the glint in her eye, it unsettled him. He filed a report, but no follow-up came, and the days turned into a week. It wasn't until the wind shifted that someone finally noticed the smell. An older neighbor, Mrs. Tilda Crenshaw, who walked her dog past the Whitaker house every morning, described it as a sickly sweet, gamey scent, like burnt pork and rot. It came from the small smokehouse behind the Whitaker property, an old structure Philip had once used to cure meat in the winter. Mrs. Crenshaw, ever the gossip, peered over the fence and saw Margot inside, with something large and red-stained hanging from the ceiling. She didn't go back. Instead, she called the sheriff. Sheriff Lal Dugan arrived with a deputy that evening. Margot greeted them calmly, offered them tea, and insisted Philip was out fixing a flat. She didn't seem surprised at all by their questions, nor did she flinch when they asked to see the children. "They're with my sister," she said. "Which sister?" the sheriff asked. She paused, then smiled. "You wouldn't know her." What happened next is a blur of horror. Sheriff Dugan, citing probable cause, pushed past her. He followed the scent, past the porch, through the backyard, and into the smokehouse. What he found inside would later be described in court documents as inhuman. Large steel pots, a butcher's table, smeared tiles, a deep freezer with 3 small body bags, partially cooked remains, bones, teeth, and on the wall, a calendar with dates marked in red, titled Feast Days. Margot didn't run. She stood by the doorway, watching them, her hands folded. "You weren't supposed to come yet," she whispered. Philip Whitaker was arrested that night, weeping, confused, screaming his wife's name. He denied everything, denied knowing, denied seeing. But the bracelet, the scent, the leftovers, the damn leftovers. During interrogation, he broke down, screaming that he hadn't known, that he couldn't have known. But the evidence was damning. Human DNA was found in his digestive tract, matching his own children. He had eaten them, cooked in rosemary and garlic, roasted with vegetables. Margot had served them to him with a smile, and he had thanked her. Every monster has a beginning, and sometimes it starts with silence, with a wound that festers beneath layers of forced smiles and Sunday clothes, with secrets buried so deep, even the ones who keep them forget where they started. But evil? It always finds a way to resurface. The revelation of what Margot Whitaker did shattered the sleepy town of Willow Creek. Overnight, the picturesque wife became a national horror story. News vans camped outside the charred perimeter of their home. Online forums speculated wildly. Margot's expressionless mugshot, pale, serene, eyes void of remorse, became a viral meme. They called her the gourmet widow, Mother Cannibal, Rosemary's wife. But behind the grotesque headlines lay a far more disturbing truth, one the world hadn't yet heard. It began, as most things do, in childhood. Margot Ann Keller was born in 1986 in upstate Vermont. Her parents were private, intensely religious survivalists. They homeschooled Margot and her siblings, raised them on a strict diet of scripture, canned goods, and fear. The children were taught that the world outside was dangerous, a test of purity. That temptation lived in food, friends, even the mirror. Her mother, Elaine, believed in culinary repentance. She taught Margot that food could cleanse or corrupt the soul. If you ate the wrong thing, you welcomed evil. If you cooked with discipline, precise, controlled, you honored God. Margot's earliest memories weren't of playdates or cartoons, but of her mother tying a raw chicken to the table and whispering prayers as she sliced it, cleansing it of worldly filth. By the time she was 13, Margot could debone a pig in under an hour. At 15, she won a regional cooking contest, using an ancient family recipe for sweetbreads and stew. The judges said it was the best thing they'd ever tasted. Margot never smiled, not even when she won. At 17, she ran away. But some things you don't leave behind. You just carry them quieter. In 2005, she met Philip Whitaker, a gentle, hard-working mechanic, 3 years older, and seemingly the opposite of the storm inside her. Philip didn't ask questions. Margot liked that. He proposed within 8 months. They married on a foggy afternoon in Willow Creek. Neighbors remembered her wedding dress. Handmade, perfectly tailored, but oddly stark. No flowers, no bridesmaids, no cake, just stew. The same stew that would later be tested for its contents and come back clean. But something started to unravel when the children came. With each birth, Elise in 2008, Jonah in 2010, and Lily in 2013, Margot grew more rigid. Her control intensified. Her rules became commandments. Sugar was forbidden. Laughter after 7 p.m. was disorderly. Every meal had to be eaten in silence. If the children spoke out of turn, she made them kneel and recite her family's kitchen prayers. The children became pale, withdrawn. Elise stopped speaking to her teachers. Jonah had bruises on his hands that looked like they came from kitchen tools. Lily's sweet, bright-eyed Lily once told a neighbor, "Mommy says bad kids get cooked." Everyone laughed. Everyone forgot. Until it was too late. When the investigators finally began combing through the house, they uncovered something far more disturbing than blood and bones. They found Margot's journals. Dozens of them. Each one handwritten in slanted, obsessively neat cursive. Leather-bound. Cataloged by date. Inside were menus, notes, recipes annotated with biblical verses, and then entries, detailed, cold entries about each child, their sins, their lessons, their flesh. Each child was given a code name: Sacrifice A, Sacrifice B, the final lamb. Elise had spoken to Satan in her dreams. Jonah had disrespected divine hunger. Lily had been touched by impurity. And so, Margot wrote, they had to be cleansed through heat and salt, so the evil would not spread. She believed she was saving them. The journals even described how she planned to feed them to Philip, not as a punishment, but as a baptism, to cleanse him, to bring him fully under her will, to make them whole. It worked, until the smokehouse betrayed her, until the bracelet didn't burn, until the silence became too loud. At Margot's preliminary hearing, she sat emotionless. Her eyes scanned the courtroom like a hawk watches mice. When asked if she had anything to say, she replied only, "They're safe now. No more noise. No more sin." Philip, now in psychiatric custody, refused to speak publicly. He was deemed unfit to stand trial, though the court cleared him of intentional wrongdoing. He now lives in a state facility, medicated and hollow. He paints, mostly, dark swirls and blank faces. He no longer eats meat. No one expected what came next. Margot's estranged brother, David Keller, emerged from hiding. A man with scars both visible and invisible. He testified before the grand jury about their childhood, about the rituals, about what their mother had done to them. David described a childhood of psychological torture, of being locked in cellars, forced to fast, then force-fed, of seeing animals slaughtered and told they were wicked souls, of Margot's cold detachment even as a child, how she once calmly cooked their pet rabbit and served it to their father just to see his reaction. There was none. David said the only difference between them was this. She stayed. I ran. The court fell silent. So did the town. When a crime is too heinous to believe, denial becomes a kind of survival. People cling to logic, to facts, to timelines. Because the alternative, that a mother calmly cooked her own children and served them to their father, is not just disturbing, it's destabilizing. It shatters the framework of trust we build our lives upon. But the investigators of Willow Creek didn't have the luxury of disbelief. They had to look deeper, and what they found would only tighten the noose around Margot Whitaker and fracture the already fragile mind of her husband, Philip. The investigation began with the autopsies, or rather, what was left of them. Dr. Simone Harrell, the county's lead forensic pathologist, described the case as the most psychologically taxing experience of my life. Inside the sealed coolers brought from the Whitaker property were remains labeled A, B, and C. Each contained partial skeletal fragments, tissue samples, and, chillingly, clearly marked Ziploc bags labeled in Margot's handwriting. Elise, thigh, Jonah, rib, Lily, heart. They were dated, frozen, cataloged like ingredients. Harrell confirmed the meat had been professionally butchered. Precise incisions, no hesitation marks. The organs had been cleaned thoroughly. There were traces of herbs and oils consistent with cooking preparation. Human teeth marks were found on some of the bones, but not from Margot. From Philip, that was the beginning of the unthinkable confirmation. Margot had not only killed her children, she had harvested them, cooked them, and fed them. The press called it the Whitaker Feast. The prosecutors called it unprecedented, ritualistic murder. The defense? Well, that was about to become complicated. Margot's public defender, Marla Dent, was assigned the case 3 weeks after her arrest. A seasoned attorney with a reputation for dealing with the worst of the worst, child abusers, serial predators, killers. But nothing prepared her for Margot. She was icy, but polite, like a hostess who doesn't realize there's blood on her apron. During their first meeting, Margot calmly corrected Dent on the case file dates. She even offered recipes. She told me I looked anemic, Dent later said, and she wrote down a liver stew I had to try. Marla petitioned for a full psychological evaluation. If Margot were insane, truly, it could change everything. But Margot passed. She was found fit to stand trial. No signs of psychosis, no delusions, high-functioning intelligence, emotionally detached but aware of her actions and their consequences. She knew, said Dr. Raphael Lynn, the psychiatrist who examined her. She just didn't care. Or worse, she believed it was right. Detectives combed through the Whitaker home, room by room, drawer by drawer. What they found painted an even more chilling portrait of a woman who had been preparing for this event for years. In the children's bedrooms, behind false walls, they discovered soundproofed insulation, locks on the outside of doors, journals belonging to Elise and Jonah, filled with desperate scrawls, Mom watches us sleep. Don't eat the stew. I heard Lily crying in the oven room. Lily was 2. The oven room was a converted cellar. No windows, just tile, drain pipes, and a commercial-grade butcher's block. The neighbors had never seen the renovations. Margot had overseen them herself, hiring contractors under aliases, paying in cash. Even more damning was the discovery of surveillance footage, encrypted, buried deep in a hard drive labeled inventory. Margot had filmed everything. The preparation, the cleansing, the feedings. She documented it like a cooking show, calm narration, deliberate instruction, with eerie detachment. In one clip, she looks into the camera, holding a glass jar of preserved human fat. "Everything has purpose," she whispers. "Even what's unwanted." The footage was never shown in court, but it changed everyone who saw it. Most notably, Philip. Despite being absolved of intentional wrongdoing, he was still under state observation. He had been sedated, medicated, and watched 24/7. But when detectives showed him the footage, hoping to break the veil of denial, something in him snapped. He didn't scream. He didn't cry. He laughed, and then he vomited until he collapsed. When he woke, he asked only one question: "Did I enjoy it?" The psychological evaluations following that moment were harrowing. Philip was declared severely dissociative, displaying trauma-induced memory fragmentation. He began having nightmares, not of the crime, but of dinner. In his dreams, Margot served him plates of food with faces. His children's faces, smiling, chewing. He was relocated to a secure psychiatric unit and placed on suicide watch. He never spoke to Margot again, and she never asked for him. Meanwhile, the town of Willow Creek tried to scrub itself clean of the stain. The school where Elise and Jonah once attended erected a small memorial. Paper flowers, crayon drawings, a row of dolls. But every few days, someone would steal one. Sometimes they'd find them, decapitated, tossed near the old smokehouse. No one claimed responsibility. People whispered of curses, of hauntings, of Margot's lingering presence. But the most unexpected twist in the investigation came 6 weeks before trial. A woman in her early 60s showed up at the sheriff's office. She looked fragile, trembling. Her name was Elaine Keller, Margot's mother, the woman who raised her in seclusion, who taught her the kitchen prayers, the one everyone assumed was either dead or hiding. Elaine had been living under a different name in Montana, but when she saw the headlines, she came forward, not to confess, to warn. "She always took it too far," she said. "She was different, even as a girl. I taught them discipline, control. But Margot? She believed the food was salvation." Elaine admitted to harsh methods, to isolation, even to religious, fasting punishments. But she denied ever hurting her children physically. "She twisted it," she said. "I raised her with structure. She turned it into sacrifice." Investigators pressed her. Was she complicit? Elaine wouldn't answer, but she did leave them with something chilling. She handed them an old photograph. Margot, age 9, standing over a wooden table. On the table was a skinned rabbit. Beside her, smiling proudly, was her father, a man who had died mysteriously just a year later, of food poisoning. Elaine whispered before she left, "I never cooked that stew." And then she disappeared. Again, back into the shadows that spawned this nightmare. By the end of the investigation, it was clear. Margot Whitaker had not simply committed a crime of passion. She had planned, recorded, and ritualized her slaughter. And for years, she had gone unnoticed. Because no one thinks to look behind a mother's smile. Understanding the how behind a crime like this is horrific, but understanding the why, that's where the real terror lies. Because motive isn't just about intention, it's about belief. About the stories people tell themselves to make the unthinkable feel righteous. And Margot Whitaker's story, the one she wrote in blood, bone, and fire, was far more disturbing than anyone imagined. Her journals weren't just records. They were scripture. Detailed, obsessive passages, some dozens of pages long, described her philosophy, her worldview, and her grim interpretation of motherhood. She didn't see herself as a murderer. She saw herself as a guardian. In Margot's eyes, the world was a corruptive force. Society, media, sugar, sin, everything outside her home threatened to infect her children. She believed she had been chosen to preserve their purity, not by shielding them, but by sanctifying them, by consuming them. In her writings, she referenced the cleansing table, an altar of her own design where she believed sin could be transformed through fire and flesh. Cooking, for Margot, was sacred, a ceremony of transformation, an offering. She saw herself as high priestess, mother, butcher, and redeemer, all in one. And the children? They weren't people anymore. They were sacrifices. In one chilling entry, she wrote, "The body is a vessel. The soul is trapped by disobedience. I will set them free, through salt, through heat, through the blade. My hands are holy. I will not weep." She didn't weep at the funeral either. Not that there was one. There were no bodies to bury, just ashes. But Margot's motive ran even deeper than religious delusion. It was about control. From interviews with surviving relatives and psychological profiling, investigators pieced together a second layer of truth, one far less mystical and far more terrifying. Margot didn't just kill because she believed it was righteous. She killed because she needed to be obeyed. Her control was absolute. She decided when her children ate, slept, spoke, or smiled. Her punishments weren't violent in the traditional sense. There were no bruises on their bodies, no broken bones. Her violence was quiet, withholding affection, silence as a weapon, isolation as a tool, food as reward and punishment. And when that control began to erode, when Elise started asking questions, when Jonah resisted mealtime, when Lily began having nightmares and calling out to her father, Margot's entire identity as the perfect mother started to crack. So she did what she had always done. She cooked. She turned disobedience into ritual. She converted defiance into devotion. And in doing so, she became untouchable in her own mind. One of the more disturbing details from the investigation was a small, handwritten note Margot kept tucked in her apron pocket. A daily mantra, perhaps. It read, "God made mothers. Mothers make meals. Meals make obedience. Obedience is salvation." During her trial, the prosecutors leaned hard into the motive of madness. But not legal insanity, moral insanity. Cold, calculated control disguised as divine purpose. Assistant District Attorney Ronell Barrett made it clear to the jury, Margot Whitaker is not insane. She is not deluded. She is a predator. One who weaponized motherhood and perverted it into the ultimate act of control. She consumed what she could not command. The defense tried to argue diminished responsibility, childhood trauma, a legacy of psychological abuse. They called David Keller, Margot's brother, to testify again. He spoke of their upbringing, of their parents' religious fanaticism, of the isolation, the starvation punishments, the terrifying mantras their mother would whisper into their ears at night. He paused, and then he said, trembling, "But we all had the same mother. I didn't kill anyone." It was the single most damning moment of the trial. Margot remained stoic, watching, calculating, until the very end. When the jury foreman read the verdict, guilty on all counts, including 3 counts of first-degree murder, abuse of a corpse, and aggravated cruelty, Margot finally reacted. She smiled, not a smirk, a slow, gentle smile, like a mother who had just watched her children fall asleep. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The judge called her a void in human form. Her only words before being led away, "They're still with me. They always will be." Margot is now housed at the St. Elora Correctional Institute for Women, a maximum security psychiatric prison. She has not spoken to any media outlet. She receives no visitors. But once a year, on the anniversary of her arrest, she sends a single letter. To Philip, they're always returned unopened. But staff confirm the content is always the same. A single sentence. "Dinner is ready." Philip remains under psychiatric supervision. He rarely speaks. When he does, it's never about Margot or the children. He paints, he walks, he reads cookbooks. The irony is not lost on his doctors. He's afraid to eat anything not made by his own hands. He weighs just over 120 pounds. What happens when justice is served, but the wound remains open? What happens when the guilty are locked away, but the questions still echo through the halls of memory? In the end, justice in the case of Margot Whitaker was not a satisfying conclusion. It was a cold gavel drop in a courtroom that reeked of grief. And no sentence, no matter how severe, could undo the nightmare she orchestrated. The aftermath of the trial rippled far beyond Willow Creek. The town, once considered a serene slice of Americana, became a magnet for morbid curiosity. Documentaries, podcasts, social media sleuths, everyone wanted a piece of the horror. The Whitaker home, despite police efforts to secure the crime scene, was eventually torn down. But it didn't stop the gawkers. They came with cameras. They took selfies. One influencer went viral after filming a 24 hours near the Cannibal Mom's smokehouse video. The sheriff's office called it a sickness of its own. But behind the spectacle, the real consequences lived in silence. The school Margot's children once attended held a memorial every October. 3 empty chairs, 3 candles. Their names were never spoken aloud again during class. Too painful, too real. But the biggest reckoning came not in the courtroom, but in the prison where Margot now resides. St. Elora Correctional Institute for Women is not your typical facility. It houses some of the most psychologically dangerous inmates in the country, those who committed heinous crimes with surgical calm. Margot fit in instantly. She refused therapy, refused visitors. But inmates noticed something strange about her. She was never violent, never loud, but somehow everyone feared her. Not because she threatened them, but because of how calm she remained. She read cookbooks. She sewed. She prayed every morning at 4:17 a.m. And she never, ever ate prison food. Instead, she fasted. For days, weeks, sometimes. Then she'd request simple ingredients: raw vegetables, vinegar, salt. She wasn't allowed knives, so she improvised. By the time the warden discovered she had been crafting her own utensils from aluminum trays and smuggling herbs from the prison garden, it was too late. Margot had prepared a full ceremonial meal in her cell. A final tribute. It didn't contain human flesh, but the symbolism was clear. She had made 3 plates, and 1 extra for Philip, written in salt on the table. "My family is whole. You can't starve love." She was placed in solitary after that, and she's remained there ever since. Her behavior has not changed. She smiles. She writes. She fasts. And she waits. For what? No one knows. But prison psychologists believe Margot isn't finished. Not physically, but mentally. They believe she's trying to transcend punishment. That in her mind, she's already become something more than human. Something eternal. The case of Margot Whitaker didn't end with her sentence. It lives on in whispers, in nightmares, in the quiet fear people feel when their child doesn't come down for dinner. Because beneath all the religious madness, the culinary horror, and the media frenzy, there is one truth more terrifying than all others. Margot believed she was doing the right thing. And that belief, cold, calculated, absolute, made her unstoppable. This case proves that secrets never stay buried, not even the darkest ones. Behind the smile of a mother, the scent of a Sunday roast, or the walls of a suburban home, there can lie something far more sinister than we're prepared to face. So now we ask you, do you think justice was served? Was Margot Whitaker evil, or a product of evil? And what about Philip? Was he a victim, or did he turn a blind eye for too long? Let us know in the comments below. We want to hear your thoughts. And if stories like this make your heart race and your skin crawl, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Because on Vanished and Unsolved, we shine a light into the darkest corners and bring the truth to the surface. Until next time, stay curious, stay safe, and never take dinner for granted again.